When HOA President Karen Pickford destroyed my driveway over an 18-inch width violation, I discovered her prized garden fence had been sitting on my property for 30 years. So I got permits and built a new curved driveway right through her award-winning landscaping. The sound of jackhammers at 3 in the morning isn't something you forget, especially when they're destroying your brand-new driveway while you sleep. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the bedroom window, floodlights blazed across my front yard like some kind of police raid. Men in hard hats were attacking my driveway with power tools, chunks of concrete flying everywhere. "Dad?" Zoe's voice cracked from the hallway. My 14-year-old daughter stood in her pajamas, eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" I grabbed my robe and rushed outside, bare feet hitting cold pavement. "Hey, stop! What the hell are you doing?" The crew foreman looked up from his jackhammer, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. "Compliance order, sir. HOA authorized emergency removal of non-conforming structures." "Non-conforming? I have permits for this driveway." He shrugged and handed me a crumpled paper. "Take it up with your homeowners association." That's when I saw her. Karen Pickford stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn in a powder blue bathrobe, arms crossed, watching my driveway get demolished with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won the lottery. Let me back up 3 months to explain how we got here. My name is Dominic Fay, and I'm a structural engineer who thought he was done with other people's problems. After my wife Sarah died from cancer 2 years ago, Zoe and I needed a fresh start. Silver Birch Estates seemed perfect. Quiet suburban community, good schools, houses with character. The 1970s colonial we bought needed work, but I saw potential where others saw problems. The previous owners had let things slide. Cracked foundation, outdated electrical, and a driveway so narrow you couldn't open your car door without stepping into the flower bed. I spent August renovating, taking time off work to make the place feel like home again. Zoe helped where she could, painting trim and organizing boxes. We were healing, slowly but surely. The driveway was my final project. The old one was barely 8 feet wide, fine for a compact car, but impossible for my pickup truck or any delivery vehicles. With Sarah's medical equipment gone, I had space to widen it properly. I pulled permits from the city, checked the property lines twice, and hired a reputable contractor. We added 18 inches to the width, bringing it to 9.5 feet total. Nothing excessive, just functional. The concrete was still curing when Karen showed up. I was hosing down tools when this woman in a tennis outfit marched across my lawn like she owned it. Perfectly blown-out blonde hair, designer sneakers that had never seen actual exercise, and the kind of smile that promised trouble. "You must be our new neighbor," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Karen Pickford, HOA president. Welcome to Silver Birch Estates." "Dominic Fay, thanks for the welcome." Her smile flickered as she studied my driveway. "That's quite an improvement you've made here. Very substantial." Something in her tone put me on guard. "City approved all the permits. Everything's up to code." Well, city code and HOA regulations aren't always the same thing. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. "Our community standards exist to protect property values for everyone." "Is there a problem?" "Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I'll have our architectural review committee take a look." She smiled again, but her eyes stayed cold. "We'll be in touch." 3 days later, a certified letter arrived. Asterisk notice of violation. Silver Birch Estates, HOA *** property. 1247 Elm Ridge Drive *** violation. Driveway width exceeds maximum allowable dimensions per Article 7, Section 3.2 of Community Covenants. *** required action. Remove non-conforming concrete. Within 10 business days or face daily fines of $150 **. I read it twice, then pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. Article 7, Section 3.2 limited driveways to no more than 8 feet in width for single-family residences. But there was a problem. My property survey showed several driveways in the neighborhood that were clearly wider than 8 feet. The Hendersons' curved driveway had to be 12 feet at its widest point. The Martins had a circular drive that was at least 15 feet across. I called Karen's number from the letter. Karen Pickford. "Hi, Karen, it's Dominic Fay from Elm Ridge Drive. I got your violation notice, but I think there might be an error." No error, Mr. Fay. Your driveway is 9.5 feet wide. Our regulations clearly state 8 feet maximum. But other driveways in the neighborhood are wider than mine. The Hendersons, the Martins, those were grandfathered in before the current regulations. Her voice turned icy. Your driveway is new construction and must comply with current standards. When were these regulations enacted? A pause. I'll have to check and get back to you. She never called back. I spent the weekend driving through Silver Birch Estates with a tape measure, documenting every driveway I could find. 19 homes had driveways wider than 8 feet. Some had been recently resurfaced or extended. The Martinez family had added a basketball hoop area just last year that pushed their driveway to nearly 11 feet. But when I called the HOA management company, they insisted my property was the only current violation. The 10-day deadline was approaching fast. I requested a hearing before the Architectural Review Committee, hoping to present my evidence and find a reasonable solution. The hearing was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. 5 committee members sat behind a folding table while I stood like a defendant in traffic court. Karen presided from the center seat, flanked by neighbors I'd never met. Mr. Fay, Karen began, thank you for coming tonight. We understand you'd like to discuss the violation notice regarding your driveway width. That's right. I believe there's been an inconsistent application of the regulations. I've documented 19 other properties with driveways exceeding 8 feet. I handed out my photos and measurements. The committee members barely glanced at them. Mr. Fay, said a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, those properties you've referenced have different circumstances. Some have variances. Others are grandfathered installations. Can I see documentation of these variances? Karen's jaw tightened. That information is confidential HOA business. But it directly relates to my case. If exceptions have been made for others, Mr. Fay. Karen's voice cut through the room. Let me be clear. Your driveway violates our community standards. Period. It's an eyesore that disrupts the aesthetic harmony we've worked years to establish. Heat rose in my chest. Eyesore? It's a driveway, a functional, necessary part of my property. A property that's already proven problematic. She leaned forward. Frankly, your entire renovation has been disruptive. Construction noise, contractor vehicles parked on the street, materials scattered across your lawn for weeks. Some residents have complained about the visual impact on our neighborhood's character. The other committee members nodded along like bobbleheads. I realized this wasn't a hearing. It was a performance. Fine, I said. What exactly do you want me to do? Karen smiled. Remove the non-conforming 18 inches. Restore your driveway to 8 feet or less. You have 6 days remaining. And if I refuse? Daily fines of $150 begin immediately. We can also place a lien on your property and pursue legal action. I looked around the room at these people who'd never spoken to me before tonight, who were ready to destroy something I'd built with my own hands. This is ridiculous. You're targeting me while ignoring identical violations throughout the neighborhood. Mr. Fay, Karen said, if you can't follow our community standards, perhaps Silver Birch Estates isn't the right fit for your family. The room went dead silent. Even her committee members looked uncomfortable. I gathered my photos and measurements. We'll see about that. Over the next 3 days, I called every contractor in town. None would touch the job. Word had gotten out about the HOA dispute, and nobody wanted to get involved in a property fight. The few who returned my calls quoted ridiculous prices. One wanted $8,000 to remove 18 inches of concrete. Meanwhile, the fines started accumulating. $150 per day, as promised. Zoe noticed my stress. She'd been through enough upheaval in her young life, losing her mother and moving to a new town. Now she was watching her father get bullied by neighbors over a driveway. Maybe we should just fix it, Dad, she said one evening over dinner. It's just concrete, right? I looked at my daughter, so mature for 14, trying to be the peacemaker, and felt my resolve harden. No, kiddo. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's hard. That weekend, Zoe was walking home from a friend's house when Karen intercepted her on the sidewalk. I only found out because Mrs. Chen across the street called me. Your daughter looked upset, Mrs. Chen said. That Pickford woman was lecturing her about something. Might want to check on her. I found Zoe in her room, door closed, music playing too loud. When I knocked, she pretended to be asleep. "Zoe, what happened with Mrs. Pickford?" "Nothing." Mrs. Chen said, "She said we don't reward rule breakers in this neighborhood." Zoe's voice was muffled by her pillow. She said families who can't follow simple rules usually don't last long here. My hands clenched into fists. Karen had crossed a line. That night, I researched every HOA regulation, every property record, every legal precedent I could find. If Karen wanted a fight, she'd get one from someone who understood engineering principles and wasn't intimidated by suburban politics. I was still awake at 2 a.m. when I heard vehicles outside. Through the window, I saw a contractor's truck parked in my driveway. 2 men were unloading a jackhammer. That's when I called the police. 911, what's your emergency? There are people destroying my property. Someone's attacking my driveway with power tools. Sir, are you in immediate danger? I don't know, but they're on my property without permission. The line went quiet for a moment. Sir, we show an active permit for emergency concrete removal at your address. This is authorized by your homeowners association. That's impossible. I never agreed to any removal. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't intervene in private contract disputes. You'll need to contact your HOA. They hung up on me. I threw on clothes and ran outside, but it was too late. The crew had already cut through half my driveway with surgical precision, removing exactly 18 inches of width. They worked with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Karen stood watching from her yard, still in that blue bathrobe, sipping coffee from a mug like she was enjoying dinner theater. "You can't do this!" I shouted over the noise. "This is destruction of private property." The foreman shut off his jackhammer. "Sir, we have all the paperwork. Emergency compliance order signed by the HOA board. Your association has the right to enforce architectural standards." He showed me documents with official letterhead and signatures. Everything looked legitimate, except I'd never been notified of any emergency board meeting or vote. "This is fraud," I said. Karen walked over, still clutching her coffee mug. "Dominic, I tried to work with you. You forced us to take action." "I forced you? You manipulated the system to destroy my property." "I protected our community from someone who thinks rules don't apply to him." She gestured at the half-demolished driveway. "Maybe now you'll understand how serious we are about maintaining standards." The crew finished their work by dawn. What had been a perfectly functional driveway was now a jagged, unusable mess. They'd cut it so precisely that my truck could no longer fit. I'd have to park on the street until I could afford repairs. $1,800 in fines had already accumulated. The HOA demanded immediate payment plus the cost of the emergency removal, another $4,000. I was trapped in bureaucratic quicksand, sinking deeper with every move. But Karen had made one critical mistake. In her rush to destroy my driveway, she'd forgotten that I'm a structural engineer with access to professional survey equipment and decades of experience reading property records. If she wanted to play games with property lines and regulations, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I took the next day off work and drove to the county courthouse. Property records are public information, and I had questions about the exact boundaries between our lots. Silver Birch Estates was developed in 1974 on land that had previously been a small farm. The original survey divided the property into 62 residential lots with specific setback requirements and easement designations. My lot, 1247 Elm Ridge Drive, shared a boundary with Karen's property at 1249 Elm Ridge Drive. According to the 1974 plat map, the line ran straight between our houses with a 5-foot utility easement on each side. But when I compared the original survey to more recent property assessments, something didn't match. Karen's decorative fence, the one that enclosed her prized side garden with the expensive hydrangeas and imported stone sculptures, appeared to cross the original boundary line by at least 3 feet. I spent another day at the courthouse, digging through deed transfers, tax assessments, and zoning changes. The more I researched, the clearer it became that Karen's fence and a significant portion of her landscaped side yard sat on land that legally belonged to me. The discrepancy dated back to 1987, when the original owner of Karen's lot had installed the fence without a proper survey. Subsequent property transfers had simply assumed the fence marked the actual boundary. For 36 years, Karen's family had been maintaining and improving land they didn't own. Under state law, adverse possession requires 20 years of continuous, open, and notorious use. Karen's fence met those criteria, but only if the original placement had been legal. Since it was installed without a survey and crossed the recorded property line, adverse possession didn't apply. That 5-foot strip of Karen's side yard legally belonged to me. I hired a licensed surveyor to confirm my findings. It cost $800 I couldn't really afford, but I needed professional documentation. The surveyor's report was unambiguous. Karen's fence encroached 4.7 feet onto my property. Her garden beds, walkway, and decorative fountain all sat on land deeded to 1247 Elm Ridge Drive. I owned nearly 200 square feet of what Karen considered her private paradise. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. But I didn't rush to confront Karen. Instead, I consulted with a property attorney who specialized in boundary disputes. He confirmed that I had legal standing to reclaim the encroached land, but warned that the process could be expensive and time-consuming. Honestly, he said, most people in your situation would try to work out a compromise. Maybe sell the strip to your neighbor for a fair price, or negotiate some kind of easement agreement. And if I don't want to compromise, then you're within your rights to reclaim your property. You could even demand she remove the fence and landscaping at her own expense. What about building on it? The attorney raised an eyebrow. Building what? Hypothetically, could I construct a driveway extension across that strip? If you own the land and obtain proper permits, you can build whatever local zoning allows. Your HOA might object, but they can't override property rights. I left his office with a new plan forming. The next morning, I filed an application with the city planning department for a secondary access drive on my property. The proposed driveway would extend from my existing concrete pad, curve across the disputed 5-foot strip, and connect to the street at a different angle. It was perfectly legal. Unusual, but legal. The permit application required a professional survey, architectural drawings, and an environmental impact assessment. I had connections in the engineering community and called in some favors. Within 2 weeks, I had all the documentation required. The city planning committee met monthly. My application was scheduled for the November meeting, giving me 3 weeks to prepare. During those 3 weeks, Karen continued her campaign of harassment. HOA fines kept accumulating. She filed noise complaints whenever I used power tools. She even reported me to code enforcement for excessive vehicle storage because I had to park my truck on the street. But I stayed quiet. Let her think she was winning. Zoe asked about the driveway situation during one of our weekend father-daughter breakfasts at the local diner. Are we going to have to move again, Dad? No, kiddo, we're staying put. But the HOA lady seems really mean and expensive. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sometimes adults act like bullies because they think they can get away with it. But bullies usually back down when someone stands up to them properly. You're going to stand up to her? Something like that. The city planning committee approved my permit application unanimously. The proposed driveway met all zoning requirements, followed proper setback rules, and included adequate drainage provisions. The fact that it crossed what appeared to be my neighbor's yard wasn't the city's concern. Property boundaries were a civil matter between landowners. I scheduled construction to begin the Monday after Thanksgiving. Karen found out about the permit when she received a mandatory notification letter as an adjacent property owner. She called me that evening, her voice shaking with rage. What is this permit application? You cannot build a driveway through my garden? Actually, I can. That strip of land belongs to my property. That's ridiculous. My fence has been there for decades. Your fence is on my land. Has been since 1987. Dead silence on the line. I'm prepared to offer you a reasonable settlement, I continued. You can purchase the encroached land for fair market value, or we can negotiate an easement agreement. But either way, I'm building my driveway. You're insane. I'll never let this happen. It's not your choice, Karen. It's my land. She hung up. The next morning, Karen organized a neighborhood meeting to address the ongoing property dispute. She sent flyers to every house in Silver Birch Estates, painting me as a vindictive troublemaker trying to destroy community harmony. About 30 residents showed up in the community center, including some I'd never seen before. Karen had prepared a presentation with aerial photos of the neighborhood, property maps, and what she called projected impact assessments. This proposed driveway, she announced, pointing to a red line on her map, would destroy mature landscaping, disrupt drainage patterns, and create a dangerous traffic situation. It's nothing more than retaliation for legitimate HOA enforcement. She showed before and after renderings of how my driveway would look cutting through her garden. The after images were deliberately ugly, stark gray concrete slashing through green space like a scar. Property values will suffer, she continued. Our neighborhood's character will be permanently damaged, all because one resident refuses to follow the same rules as everyone else. When she finished, she opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up around the room. Can he really do this? What can we do to stop him? Should we consider legal action? Karen fielded questions like a seasoned politician, promising to explore all available options and protect our community from this vindictive attack. Finally, Mrs. Chen raised her hand. She was the neighbor who'd called about Zoe and one of the few people who'd been friendly since we moved in. Has anyone actually seen the survey documentation? She asked. If Mr. Fei owns the land, shouldn't we understand the facts before taking sides? Karen's smile tightened. The survey is part of an ongoing dispute. I can't share confidential legal documents. But you're asking us to support your position without seeing evidence? I'm asking you to trust your elected HOA president and support our community's interests. Mrs. Chen didn't look convinced, but she sat down. The meeting ended with Karen promising to fight this destructive project through every legal channel available. Most residents left seemingly convinced that I was the villain in this story. I didn't attend the meeting, but Zoe did. She'd insisted on going despite my concerns, saying she wanted to understand what people were saying about us. How bad was it? I asked when she got home. Pretty bad, but Mrs. Chen was nice. And Mr. Martinez asked some good questions about whether the HOA had overstepped with your original driveway. What did you think? I think Mrs. Pickford is scared, Zoe said. Really scared. People only get that mean when they know they're wrong. Out of the mouths of babes. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, Karen launched a full-scale campaign to stop my driveway project. She organized a petition drive, contacted local media, and even reached out to city council members. Her strategy was simple: paint me as a vindictive neighbor using legal technicalities to destroy community harmony. She gave interviews to the local newspaper describing my project as spite construction, designed to punish the HOA for enforcing reasonable standards. The newspaper ran a story titled, "Driveway Dispute Divides Neighborhood." Karen was quoted extensively, while I declined to comment on advice from my attorney. Mr. Fei has chosen legal warfare over neighborhood cooperation, Karen told the reporter. His proposed driveway serves no practical purpose except revenge. The story included a photo of Karen standing in her garden next to the disputed fence, surrounded by carefully tended flowers and decorative stones. She looked like a concerned homeowner protecting her little slice of paradise from an unreasonable aggressor. I let her have her moment in the spotlight. Soon enough, the facts would speak for themselves. Construction began on November 27th. I'd hired the same contractor who'd built my original driveway, a local company with excellent references and proper licensing. The crew arrived at 7 a.m. with a concrete truck, excavator, and surveying equipment. I'd provided them with precise measurements and GPS coordinates for the new driveway path. Karen was waiting in her front yard when they started working, arms crossed, cell phone ready to document everything. The excavator operator began digging the foundation trench exactly where my survey indicated the property line. As the machine bit into Karen's carefully maintained lawn, she started screaming, "Stop! You're destroying private property! This is vandalism!" I walked over calmly. "Karen, I've told you repeatedly, this is my land. You've been trespassing for 36 years. That's not true. Your property survey is wrong. I have a certified boundary analysis that shows the correct lines." She called the police. 2 officers arrived within minutes, having clearly been briefed on the situation by previous calls. "Ma'am," the first officer said, "this appears to be a civil property dispute. We can't intervene in boundary disagreements between neighbors." "But he's destroying my garden." "If he owns the land, he has the right to use it. You'll need to resolve this in civil court." The officers left, and Karen called her attorney. Then she called the city building inspector. Then she called the mayor's office. By noon, my driveway construction had attracted a small crowd. Neighbors stood on sidewalks taking photos and videos. Some looked horrified, others seemed fascinated by the drama. Karen maintained a constant vigil, documenting every shovel of dirt and measuring tape placement. She'd hired her own surveyor to verify the property lines, but he wouldn't arrive until the following day. The concrete truck arrived at 2 p.m. My contractor had scheduled the pour for maximum efficiency. They'd complete the entire driveway in one continuous operation. As liquid concrete flowed across what had been Karen's prize garden, she broke down crying. Real tears, not performative emotion. For the first time, I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered her standing in my yard at 3 a.m., watching contractors destroy my driveway. I remembered her threatening my daughter. I remembered months of harassment and legal bullying. The guilt passed. By evening, my new driveway was complete. It curved gracefully from my existing pad, swept across the formerly disputed strip, and connected to the street with a gentle radius turn. The contractor had even included decorative stamping and a slight color tint that complemented my home's exterior. It was actually beautiful, much more elegant than the straight utilitarian approach Karen had forced me to remove. But the real masterpiece was the placement. My new driveway didn't just cross Karen's former garden space. It encircled her decorative fountain, wrapped around her imported stone sculptures, and created a concrete border that followed the exact legal property line. Karen's remaining garden looked like an island surrounded by my driveway. The local news crew arrived just as the concrete was setting. They interviewed Karen, who stood surrounded by the ruins of her landscaping, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "This man has destroyed 15 years of work," she told the reporter. "Beautiful gardens, rare plants, thousands of dollars in improvements, all because he couldn't accept a simple HOA violation." Then they interviewed me. I'd prepared for this moment. "I'm simply using my own property," I said calmly. "Missy, Pickford's fence has been encroaching on my land since 1987. I have professional surveys and legal documentation proving ownership. I offered to negotiate a settlement, but she chose confrontation instead." The reporter asked about the timing. "Isn't this retaliation for the HOA driveway dispute?" "The timing is coincidental. I've been planning this project since I discovered the boundary error several months ago. My original driveway was destroyed without my consent, so I needed an alternative access route. Why not build a simpler driveway that doesn't impact your neighbor's landscaping? Because this is the most efficient use of my property. The curved design provides better drainage and traffic flow than a straight path." It was all true, even if not the complete truth. That night's news broadcast led with "Driveway Drama Destroys Garden." The story showed aerial footage of my concrete path cutting through Karen's former paradise, interviews with both of us, and commentary from legal experts about property rights versus neighborhood cooperation. Karen came across as emotional and sympathetic. I appeared calm and rational, perhaps a bit cold. Public opinion would probably favor her initially, but I was playing a longer game. The next morning, Karen's surveyor arrived to dispute my boundary claims. I watched from my kitchen window as he set up equipment and took measurements. 3 hours later, he packed up and left without speaking to Karen. I saw him hand her a written report, which she read twice before crumpling into a ball. My phone rang an hour later. "You son of a bitch!" Karen's voice was barely controlled. "How long have you known?" "Known what?" "Don't play stupid. My surveyor confirmed your boundary claims. The fence has been on your property for decades." "I tried to tell you that. You manipulated this entire situation. You could have approached me diplomatically, worked out a reasonable agreement. Like you worked out a reasonable agreement about my driveway width?" Silence. "Karen, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this professionally. Instead, you chose to destroy my property, harass my daughter, and turn the entire neighborhood against me. You made this personal." "This isn't over." "Actually, it is. My driveway is complete, the concrete is cured, and I have full legal right to use my own land. Unless you want to escalate to actual litigation, I suggest you accept reality and move on." She hung up without responding. But Karen wasn't ready to accept defeat. Over the next 2 weeks, she filed complaints with every authority she could find. Building code violations, environmental impact violations, traffic safety violations, noise ordinance violations, anything that might force me to remove the driveway. Every complaint was investigated and dismissed. My permits were valid, the construction met all regulations, and I had clear property rights. Karen's attorney sent a formal letter demanding I remove the spite driveway and restore her landscaping. My attorney responded with copies of the boundary survey and a counterclaim for 36 years of trespass damages. The legal chess match was getting expensive for both of us, but I had one advantage. I was right. Meanwhile, the neighborhood remained divided. Some residents supported Karen's position that I'd gone too far in my retaliation. Others thought the HOA had overreached with the original driveway destruction and that Karen had brought this on herself. The upcoming HOA board election became a referendum on the dispute. Karen was running for re-election as president, while two other candidates promised to restore neighborhood harmony and prevent future property conflicts. Zoe handled the attention better than I expected. Some classmates' parents had taken sides in the dispute, which created awkward social situations. But she navigated it with the maturity of someone who'd already survived bigger challenges. "Are you happy now?" she asked one evening as we walked past my completed driveway. "Happy isn't the right word. Satisfied, maybe." "It does look pretty cool, like a racetrack for the house." I laughed. "That's not exactly the aesthetic I was going for." "Mrs. Pickford's garden looked better before, though." "Yeah, it did. But sometimes people force you into situations where nobody wins cleanly." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. She understood complicated situations better than most adults. December brought the first real test of my new driveway. A winter storm dumped 8 inches of snow on Silver Birch Estates, and I discovered that my curved design had created a slight drainage problem. Snowmelt pooled near Karen's fountain, which was now surrounded by my concrete. I spent a weekend installing additional drainage to prevent water from backing up onto either property. It was the responsible thing to do, even though I wasn't legally required to address it. Karen watched from her window as I worked, but didn't come outside to talk. We'd reached a Cold War détente, where we avoided direct contact while maintaining our positions. The HOA board election was scheduled for January 15th. As the date approached, Karen's campaign became increasingly desperate. She organized Save Our Community rallies and distributed flyers warning that my aggressive tactics threatened everyone's property values. Her opponent, Jim Martinez, took a more moderate approach. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made on both sides and promised to focus on community building rather than personal conflicts. I didn't actively campaign against Karen, but I didn't have to. The facts spoke for themselves, and more residents were learning the complete story rather than just Karen's version. Mrs. Chen organized a neighborhood information session where both sides could present their cases without personal attacks. About 40 residents attended, including several who'd been staying neutral until now. I presented my timeline of events: the original driveway construction with proper permits, the HOA violation notice based on selectively enforced regulations, the secret emergency meeting that authorized destruction of my property, and the discovery of boundary encroachment that led to the new driveway. Karen presented her version focusing on community standards, aesthetic harmony, and my vindictive overreaction to reasonable HOA enforcement. The questions from residents were revealing. Many were learning for the first time about the falsified HOA records, the selective enforcement of driveway regulations, and the legal complexities of the boundary dispute. "Why didn't you just pay the fines and modify the driveway?" asked one neighbor. "Because the fines were based on fraudulent enforcement," I replied. Karen targeted me while ignoring identical violations throughout the neighborhood. If I'd backed down, what would have stopped her from targeting the next person who didn't fit her vision of community perfection? "But couldn't you have resolved the boundary issue without destroying the garden?" asked another. I offered multiple settlement options. Karen could have purchased the encroached land or negotiated an easement agreement. She chose to reject all compromise and pursue legal warfare instead. By the end of the session, the room felt different. Karen still had supporters, but many residents seemed to understand that the situation was more complex than originally presented. The election results weren't close. Jim Martinez won with 63% of the vote, while Karen received only 28%. The remaining votes went to a third candidate who'd barely campaigned. Karen's defeat in the HOA election marked the end of her power to retaliate against me, but it also began the final phase of our conflict. 2 days after losing the election, Karen filed a comprehensive lawsuit seeking damages for property destruction, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to deprive her of property rights. She was seeking $50,000 in compensation plus legal fees. I wasn't surprised. Karen had invested too much in this fight to surrender gracefully, but I was confident in my legal position and ready to finish what she'd started. My attorney filed a countersuit for trespass, conversion of property, abuse of process, and defamation. We sought $25,000 in damages plus attorney fees and a permanent injunction preventing Karen from interfering with my property rights. The discovery phase of litigation revealed the extent of Karen's misconduct. HOA records showed she'd manipulated board votes, misrepresented property boundaries, and used association funds for personal landscaping projects that primarily benefited her own property. Most damaging was evidence that Karen had known about the boundary discrepancy for over a year before my driveway dispute. Her own title insurance company had flagged the fence placement during a refinancing application, but she'd chosen to ignore the issue rather than address it. Karen's husband, Greg, became a key witness in the case. During his deposition, he revealed that he'd warned Karen months earlier not to escalate the driveway conflict. "I told her the fence might be on the neighbor's property," he testified. "Our title company had raised questions about it. But Karen said the neighbor was new and wouldn't know about old boundary issues." "Did your wife intentionally target Mr. Faye's driveway knowing she had her own property problems?" Karen's attorney objected, but Greg had already answered. "She said someone who breaks HOA rules probably doesn't research property lines either." It was devastating testimony that proved Karen had acted in bad faith from the beginning. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in March. Karen had hired an expensive attorney who specialized in property disputes, while I stuck with the local lawyer who'd guided me through the initial phases. Karen's case relied heavily on emotional appeals. Her attorney painted her as a dedicated community volunteer whose peaceful retirement had been destroyed by a vengeful neighbor's spite construction. They showed photos of her former garden, testimonials from neighbors about her years of HOA service, and expert testimony about the negative impact on property values. "Mrs. Pickford made mistakes," her attorney admitted during opening statements. "But those mistakes don't justify the deliberate destruction of 15 years of careful landscaping and thousands of dollars in improvements." My attorney took a different approach. He focused on property rights, legal documentation, and Karen's pattern of misconduct. "This case isn't about gardens or community harmony," he told the jury. "It's about a homeowner's right to use his own property without harassment from neighbors who think rules apply to everyone except themselves." We presented the boundary survey, the falsified HOA records, and evidence of selective enforcement. Most importantly, we showed that I'd offered multiple opportunities for reasonable settlement, all rejected by Karen in favor of escalation. The turning point came when Karen took the stand in her own defense. Under cross-examination, she was forced to admit that she'd known about the boundary discrepancy before targeting my driveway. "You knew your fence was on Mr. Faye's property when you filed the HOA violation, didn't you?" "I suspected there might be some technical issue with the old surveys." "Technical issue? Ma'am, your own title company identified a clear encroachment. You chose to ignore it." "The fence had been there for decades. I assumed it was legal." "But you didn't verify that assumption before destroying Mr. Faye's driveway, did you?" Karen's composure cracked. "He was violating community standards. Someone had to enforce the rules." "Rules that you violated more egregiously than he ever did?" her attorney objected, but the damage was done. Karen had admitted to acting hypocritically while knowing she was vulnerable to the same type of property challenge. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found in my favor on all counts, awarding me $18,000 in damages and attorney fees. They rejected Karen's counterclaims entirely, but the judge went further than the jury verdict. In his final ruling, he issued a permanent injunction requiring Karen to remove her fence from my property within 30 days and prohibiting any future interference with my property rights. This court finds that defendant Pickford engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment based on her own violation of the same standards she sought to enforce, the judge wrote. Her conduct represents an abuse of homeowner association authority that cannot be tolerated. Karen appealed the decision, but her attorney advised that the appeal had little chance of success. The evidence was too clear, and appellate courts rarely overturn jury verdicts in property disputes. 3 weeks after the trial ended, Karen put her house on the market. I felt an unexpected mix of satisfaction and sadness watching her pack moving boxes. The fight had consumed almost a year of both our lives and cost us thousands of dollars in legal fees. Nobody had won cleanly. But I'd protected my property rights and established a precedent that might prevent future HOA abuse. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for.